Wait for it to load up. Wait for it to. Okay, cool. Great. Okay. All right. So we are live on YouTube. For those of you who have tuned into YouTube, welcome. I know that this is potentially a recording for you, but wanted to say welcome. So we've had a little bit of some logistic issues trying to get everything straightened out today. So we might have some hiccups, but thank you for your patience. I'm sure that the message will bless you. And we will go ahead and we will get started. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I am really excited about this message. There's a few big reasons why, but the biggest of which is that I have experienced personal confirmation about this message in a lot of ways this week, not only in my own life as experience, but also in the lives of people around me who are in my circle of influence, who are special to me. Okay. We need to talk a little bit about the wilderness season really quick. So for those of you who don't know what the wilderness season is and I will tell you, in Messianic circles, I do not feel like I have experienced the doctrine of the wilderness season in its extremity like I have in this ministry and the ministry prior that I was in before I started this ministry. But the wilderness season is really simple. During the counting of the Omer, so the first Sabbath after the Passover meal, okay? So Passover finishes, and then the first true Sabbath, the Saturday Sabbath, not the Sabbath of the unleavened bread, but the true Saturday Sabbath, the first Sabbath after that meal, begins the Feast of First Fruits. On that day, you begin counting what's called the Omer. And in counting the Omer, what you're doing is you're taking inventory of what you have reaped. Okay? Now, in that process, you count 7 Sabbaths and then 1 day, or 50 days. So you're counting the Sabbath of weeks. So you're counting 1 week at a time. That's why it's called the Feast of Weeks. Pentecost is called the Feast of Weeks. You're counting 1 week at a time and measuring each Sabbath until you get to that 7th Sabbath. And then 1 day later is Pentecost. Well, that season for the Israelites was basically after the Red Sea. The Feast of Unleavened Bread and Passover itself were connected to and part of the Red Sea experience and the oasis that they arrived at. But after a while, the Israelites start to be brought, they have to follow the cloud, right? The cloud leaves. Like, oh, yep, we better follow that. But it doesn't lead them along the oases that are present along the Red Sea. It leads them into the desert. And in that process of leading them into the wilderness, something happens. They run out of water. They have no water. Then they begin to grumble. And so Moses strikes the rock. Water comes from the rock. They have water. Then all of a sudden they have no food. And so now Moses lets them know that tomorrow food's going to come, and food comes, and it's the manna. And then the Amalekites attack the rear of the camp where the stragglers are. So as they're traveling, this is not a positioned, posted camp, because then they would have a hard time getting in. They wait until they break camp and start moving, and Joshua is leading the group next to the cloud, right? Following the cloud. But this is over 600,000 men on foot, which equates to about 1.2 million people moving. And so way back in the distance, Amalek attacks the weak ones, the stragglers, the ones who have kind of fallen behind in their movement with the rest of Israel. So as a result of that, by the time they get to Sinai, they have already experienced hunger, thirst, and an attack from an enemy. Well, when they get to Sinai, they happen to arrive in the second month, which is close to the proximity of Pentecost. And so we've always equated that Sinai was Pentecost, was the first Pentecost. But the principle is that as we examine that and as we take a look at this, there's a few things that are very important that we need to get ourselves into. The first one is that he led them into the desert. That's number one. Then he lets them go thirsty. He lets them go hungry. And then he lets them be attacked. Remember what he did at the Red Sea? Why didn't he do that with Amalek? Joshua turns around, goes back, fights Amalek. Moses raises his hands, lowers his hands. Battle prevails or doesn't prevail, and eventually Israel wins that day. Israel had to fight the battle. And so there's a few things that are really important there. Number one is, during this season, because we walk out the feast days every year, we walk out the feast days. And Passover was linked to Egypt. And Feast of Unleavened Bread was linked to the Red Sea. And Counting of Omer is linked to the wilderness season. So welcome to the wilderness season, where we walk in lack and decrease, because this is what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. It says, I let you go hungry so that I could show the evil in your heart. Paraphrased. Literally, this season, this time is designed to expose the filth. But what we have learned and identified is that, number one, vengeance is coming. Manna is coming. Water is coming. And if you will stay focused on that faithfulness, you will be like Joshua, and you will eventually enter the promised land. You won't say, God brought me out into the wilderness to die, which I think I probably have already said this week. It's a difficult thing not to say. But the premise is that it will bring up stuff. You guys ever get hangry, right? Well, the reason why this is important is because there's something else present in this. And that is that Yahweh pulled away, Amalek attacked, and Joshua and the armies of Israel dealt with Amalek, not God. Meaning what? This is a season in which we are supposed to fight our battles. But there's more here. There's a greater wisdom, and I want to share it with you guys today. And I really am excited about the way in which I got to experience this. But I can tell you that there is a complete shalom to be had in the wilderness season if you will allow the things to come. And we're going to get more into that, but the short version of this, like if all of a sudden the YouTube channel failed and the internet failed, hear this. You have to turn around and go back away from the cloud and fight the enemy. And that's going to turn into you being the enemy. We're going to get there. Okay, so first thing that I want to do is I want to put some illustrations on the board and talk a minute about the ancient pictographic Hebrew alphabet. So first and foremost, there's a couple of things you need to know. The first one is that the ancient pictographic Hebrew alphabet is the original Torah. What I mean by that is it doesn't matter all the different evolutions that the word went through. If you use the Gesenius use the Gesenius or the Brown Driver Briggs. Really, the Gesenius is more in depth in terms of this. But if you use those two lexicons, you will find that there are times where it'll say this word, and then it'll give the Arabic, it'll give the Syriac, it will give the Ethiopian Coptic, it will give the Latin, it will give the Greek. And it will explain how that word evolved in the etymology of the languages. There's a few reasons why this is important. The first one is that none of those matter, because that's an evolution of the word of the original intent that was given by the person who actually wrote the word to begin with. Now, there's a couple ways we could go about this. We could go anthropomorphic. I'm sorry, not anthropomorphic. We could go with anthropology. And we could go in the direction and say that civilization evolved and the writing systems and all that stuff evolved from pictures into characters into an alphabet that we have today. Okay? So I'm going to give a brief illustration of what I mean by that, and then we're going to get into something a little bit more deep. Okay? All right. So moving to the whiteboard, basically what we have is we have the drawing of an ox. Okay? You will see this in so many different cultures. You will find that in general, these cultures all have this same head, even Native American cultures. Okay? So all these ancient cultures have this same head, and it means in most languages, strong. The principle is that the lead ox was basically a animal who understood how to walk the line. So an ox that was untamed was eventually tamed. The yoke was put upon their neck, and they were tamed for the yoke. And as they would pull the yoke, the farmer would direct them to the line. The second time that they did it, there was more muscle memory. There was more understanding of the line, that they focus on the line, they see. And of course, there's the grain reward. Maybe we could go into all that, right? That there would be a reward for doing the work. But what's interesting about the lead ox is that the lead ox is actually the ox that does not need to be guided by the person running the plow. They know the line already. And so what they'll do is they'll yoke an inexperienced ox to that ox. Because if you're yoked, there is a solid beam from neck to neck. And so as this ox is walking the straight line, this ox is pulled into order. Okay? That is this pictograph. Let's get back to the board. So the lead ox, this is not the lesser ox. This is the lead ox. This is the aleph. Okay? And so eventually it turns into this symbol. Then over time, probably about maybe 1500 BC, it turns into this symbol. And by 500 BC, it is this symbol. And then eventually it's the capital A, or the alpha in Greek. Okay, so that is the lead ox. Now, the reason why this is important is because in that process now, you can see how language evolved. But let's go back to the beginning, because one thing that's known is that the end is declared from the beginning. Okay? So here we have the beginning. Now on this side, we have a very unique symbol that is present in a number of ancient Semitic languages: Akkadian, Sumerian, and ancient Hebrew. And the theory is that this is a floor plan drawing of a tent. And this was the sleeping area here. This was the cooking and preparation area here. And then there was usually some sort of canopy that came out over here. And the man of the house would sit at the door of the tent here. Okay, so when we see Abraham sitting in the door of the tent, that's probably where he was at. But this, and by the way, we'll just go ahead and we'll go ahead and label this really quick. This is Aleph. Okay. Now on this side, we have tent. That's the concrete. Okay. That's the concrete. But this is actually the bait. Okay. Now, what's interesting about the bait is eventually, obviously, it starts to take this journey, right? It turns sideways. And eventually it gets closed. So it starts to look like this. And then, of course, we have the beta from Greek. Okay. So there's the evolution of that. Now, the reason why this is important is because now you can see that there was an evolution of language. However, this right here is called a parent root. Okay, parent root. Now, I know a lot of you know this already. Okay. But the reason why I want to focus in on this really quick is because of what we were about to get into. What the concepts need to be very well understood. Okay. So now the parent root, this parent root is a combination of the lead ox and the tent. So now I can combine these two words to strong tent. Now, anybody who has done enough seeking of understanding in Hebrew knows that this is actually Aleph Bet, which is what? It is the strength of the tent. This is the word in Hebrew for father, Av. In Aramaic, Abba. Okay? So you could see that this combines the lead ox, the strongest and most straight in order animal, and the tent to create the definition of father. Okay? So the reason why this is important is because I wanted you to see how these pictographs tell the story without needing to have an etymology or a evolution of the word. There is no greater way to describe a father than that he is the strength of the tent, especially because what do we know is in the tent? In the tent is provision, protection, and what else? Instruction. Those three things are present in the tent. In fact, you could actually nail down the process that a man as a father is supposed to provide, protect, and instruct his family. Okay? So now you could see how the ancient Hebrews brought together pictographs to make parent roots were a combination of two letters. Okay? Now, in the Hebrew alphabet, let's talk for a minute. In the Hebrew alphabet, there are 22 letters. When you look into Torah, there are only 22 letters. Now, in the Arabic alphabet, there's 28, I believe. In the Ugaritic alphabet, there's 26. In the Coptic alphabet, which is Amharic, which is another version of ancient Semitic, there is 32, I think. But in the Torah itself, there are only 22 letters. Why is that important? Well, first of all, there is a very relevant fact present, and that is simply this. Yahweh told Moses, when I'm dealing with a prophet, I will speak to them through visions and dreams. But not so with my servant Moses, for I speak to him face to face. Torah is a transcript of a conversation, not a inspired iteration of words. In other words, everything that Yahweh said, Moshe wrote down. That's very important. Everything that Yahweh said, Moshe wrote down. So you don't go into Torah thinking that Moses somehow put his 2 cents into Torah. That's what the nations do. The nations say, oh, you know what? We got about 3 different authors here, and there's really no proof that Moses was even real, because we can't really find the record of the Exodus in our Egyptology, blah, 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 blah. But Paul says that if a Gentile, though not having the law, does the things of the law, he shows himself to be a law unto himself, and that the Torah has been written on his heart, his conscience accusing or defending him. In other words, however much it was written down, it was also a force of process within us. And so however much we want to go and say, oh, this person authored this, and this person authored this, and there's this Yahweh group, and there's this Elohim group, and there's this El Shaddai group, and these 3 different authors all contributed to Torah. No, we accept what Torah says. Torah does not apologize for being the truth. So, why is that important? Well, Torah was not written in the modern Aramaic Hebrew that we see today. This right here is modern Aramaic Hebrew. That is not Hebrew. That's Aramaic. Why is that important? Because the Hebrew that was used in the 1st century BC isn't used anymore. It didn't die. It stopped being used because Babylonian Aramaic became the order of the day after the Jews were kicked out of Jerusalem during the siege and eventual destruction of Jerusalem, when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. So, and not only that, but they brought some of that back from Babylon when they were in exile. They used Aramaic in Babylon. Aramaic is a Babylonian a language. So there's a few reasons why this is important. The first one, and I think this is very important, is compared to the other 2 that I'm going to tell you, is that Torah is a transcript in the sense of a letter for letter inspiration of God, where Yahweh is saying something to Moses and Moses is writing the words as they're spoken. But they were written in the pictographs, not the characters, which means each word told a story. Strong tent, not father. Father's an English word from the bastardization of Vater in German. Okay, and so from that perspective, then, what do we have here? We have a very, very different language in Torah at that time. Okay, so when I talk about the 22 letters, we're going to go with that they're divinely inspired. Let me give you an example of this, okay? This is kind of more for you science buffs, but let me give you an example of this. The Hebrew letter Kof is drawn like this, but originated as this. Okay. Now here's something interesting about this. This is the sun setting at the horizon or rising at the horizon when you have that intensification of light, where there's darkness all around out here, right? But there's this intensification of light. Now, here's what's intriguing about this. This word means condense. It is the concrete idea of a strong pressing together and a density increasing. So let's talk about this a minute. The ancient pictographic Hebrew uses a drawing of the sun at the horizon, where there's an intensification of light and all around it there's darkness, to indicate the idea of condensation, of an increase in the density of a material. Do you get that? Because one of the things that's happening in the sun is an increase in density of material. And we did not know that until we began spectral analysis of the sun and until we discovered nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. So when I say that the Hebrew alphabet in its pictographs is divinely inspired, they could not have known these things. And now all of a sudden we start speculating on the model of a black hole, and we have the exact same picture of an event horizon. Looks a little bit more like this. But you get my point. As much as we will go with that the ancient pictographic Hebrew language is an anthropomorphic process. In other words, it's based upon the culture of the human, the civilization of the human at that time, and eventually develops into a character set, and eventually develops into a language that's used. But in our Torah, at the time when Moses was writing it, he was writing divinely inspired letters on a scroll that tell a story. Okay, now that I've presented this and listen, I know you guys have heard some of this before, and I know that these details may be a little bit monotonous, but I really want you to focus your brain on that it's divinely inspired letters. I'm sorry, divinely inspired pictograph pairs, creating words and naming things and creating circumstances. Okay? Okay. Now, having said that, the next thing that we need to do here is we need to talk about these 22 letters. There is in the Hebrew alphabet a letter that looks like this. And it is the Ayin. Now, there is another Hebrew letter in the Hebrew alphabet that looks like this and is called the Resh. And you know what I'm going to actually do? I'm going to actually go back and do this the other way. I'm going to put the Resh on this side. Okay? And this is going to be Resh. And on this side, we have the Ayin. Okay. So we have Resh, Ayin. Now, if we were to say, what does this word mean? some people would look at this word and they'd say, oh, that means evil. And other people would look at this word and they say, oh, that means shepherd. So let me explain to you why that happened and what's the importance here. By the time we get to Torah, we have 22 letters. You cannot find a 23rd letter in Torah. Okay? But you need to keep in mind that the Torah that we have right now is actually written in what? Modern Aramaic. Not even Hebrew, it's Aramaic. Okay? And when I'm saying that, I'm saying the letters, not the language spoken. Okay? Now, there's a few reasons for this. The first one is that this is actually the drawing of a human head. And for those of you who think this looks like somebody, it's not him. Okay? All right. And on this side, we have a dilemma because we have the drawing of an eye, but then we have this other letter. It looks like this. Okay? So we have the resh can meet both of these. Literally the idea of man or head. This is in the word Bereshit, in the word beginning. It is the word Bereshit. When you drop the bait, which means in, then it's a Reshit. Reshit is from the root Rosh, which means what? Top or head or the source. But in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, this is the Resh. It's the head of a man. Okay? On this side, we have a witness. The ayin represents the sight of a human to observe and then later speak. Okay? That's what the ayin represents. This, on the other hand, is a twisted rope. Now, let me tell you what's intriguing about this word, about this letter here, okay? A, it is not present in modern Aramaic. But I want you to notice something. This does not look like an eyeball. This looks more like a twisted rope. So the evolution of the letter before Torah was ever written happened in this way. The name of the letter was kept, which meant eye. Ayin, eye, to see. But the shape of the letter was taken from the Ga, meaning what? We have a letter that has a dual meaning. Now, there's a few reasons why this is important. The first reason why it's important is because when we're looking at this, we have what? We have man, we have man watches. And it literally means shepherd or friend. For example, in the shepherd psalm, Lord is my shepherd, it says roe, which is basically that with a vav. Now, here's the reason why this is important. This word is very special, right? Shepherd. This is the core of the ancient nomadic cultures. And this is the core of our faith. This is the concept of the good shepherd. This is the concept of the man who watches over us, the protector. In fact, In the Hebrew, when we talk about the word Yeshua, it means the word Yeshua as an infinitive is literally means salvation, but it literally in the ancient pictographic Hebrew means to snatch out of danger violently, and the actual parent root is destroyer watches, because the shepherd, when he needs to, can get pretty nasty with the enemy. Okay, so now looking at that side, then what we need to do is we need to look at this side. And on this side, we have head twisted. Now, you guys know that I taught a message in the past a little bit about this, but I'm going to bring a little bit more into fruition here. So I think the first thing that we really need to get our minds around is that this is the word shepherd. And this is the word evil. So what is evil actually? It's a twisting of the head or twisting of thoughts. Evil in general, I mean, evil when it is connected with good. When good is defined in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, it has a sentiment of function. In ancient pictographic Hebrew, when you want to understand good, it has a sentiment of function. It's when things are operating in their natural order processes correctly. What do I mean by natural order processes? The processes of the body, growth in a tree, the way a bee makes honey, all of the things that happen naturally or are supposed to happen naturally. When they don't, that's dysfunction, and that's evil. Meaning what? A dysfunctional head would be a real problem. Few reasons why that's true. What's the first reason? Well, simply put, Yahweh put Adam in charge of everything and his sons as an inheritance. Literally said, all this is yours, govern it, do what you want with it, have fun. And let it spin. And let man decide and dictate what happened in this world. And the times when he intervened when prophets had determined that there was an injustice and needed to call fire down upon that place. Peter says that Lot's soul was vexed, Lot's righteous soul was vexed daily because of the wickedness in Sodom. So what cry went out to Yahweh? Lot's cry. And what happens? The two messengers go down to Sodom and Gomorrah. And who do they meet with? Lot. And who do they rescue? Lot. Lot's righteous soul was vexed daily. Yahweh tells Abraham, hey, with your permission, I'd like to go down there and destroy that place, because if that cry is true, it's not okay. And that's when Abraham establishes the minyan. That's when Abraham says, nope, 10 men. You find 10 righteous, that city stays. In Ezekiel 12, it says, if Abraham was present in a city and I bring a sword against that city, I would not spare that city for the sake of Abraham, but Abraham himself would be saved. Which is exactly what happened with Lot. But the premise and the important part of this is the rest of the time, he doesn't interfere. If there's stuff going on and there's not a watchman to call fire down upon that place, it goes unnoticed. And my proof is in Ezekiel 22. Go read Ezekiel 22. Become an expert in it, because it is the absolute implication not only of this country, but of this world. That at the end of that chapter, he says, I looked for somebody who wanted to change it. I couldn't find anybody. So I'm going to destroy this place. And he did. And Jeremiah sat there in Jerusalem going, y'all asked for this. Okay, so let's talk about why this would be important. First of all, there's a few reasons. Number one, when we're looking at this, a very important fact is this is all you see in Torah. So it could mean either one of these. And by the way, this isn't the only word where ayin doubles as another word. But there's a verse I want to look at real quick. And it is in Genesis chapter 8. Genesis chapter 8, verse, I believe we're going to be looking at verse 21. Now, we've already talked a little bit about this, but one of the things that you need to know is here's our word evil. Now, there's a sentiment in Christianity, in some areas of Christianity, and I'm just going to read this word verse to you really quick, but I'm only going to read to you the quotes, okay? In other words, I'm just going to read this part right here. I will never again curse the ground because of the human race. Even though everything they think or imagine is bent towards evil from childhood, I will never again destroy all living things. As long as the earth remains, there will be planting and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night. This is after the flood. This is after they come out of the flood. They come out of the ark. This is during a time when Noah is having table fellowship with his God. And as he's barbecuing his sacrifice, getting ready to eat it, Yahweh speaks and says, I'm not going to curse the ground anymore. That was the curse that was put on Adam, y'all. I'm not going to curse the ground anymore because of the human race. Even though everything they think or imagine is bent towards evil from childhood. But what I want to talk about today has actually nothing to do with anything that I just showed you. That was just to get you to this point. Because what we want to look at is a word in the Hebrew here that is a very important word that we need to have during this wilderness season. And that is going to be the word chashav. And we'll get into the concept, because generally speaking, when we're dealing with the word imagination, we're dealing with Yetzir, okay? Or Yatzar. But when we are dealing with the meditation of a man's heart or his plans, we're dealing with a different word. And that word is this word think, right? It is the word machashavat, and it is basically let's see, where is it at here? Okay, so never again curse the ground. Let's see, maybe it's on this side. It is the idea of imagination, and I'm going to explain to you how it works here. But I believe that, now see, I know that that word is in his statement about the humans. Okay, let me take a look here. So the word itself is machashavat, and I can do it this way. And the verse that we're specifically going to be looking at is actually where the proverb says, man can make his plans, but the Lord directs his paths. And the reason why this is important is because we have in our hearts an idea here. This is in Proverbs. Here we go, 16:9. Where we're going to be looking at this word right here, chashav. This word right here is the word for think or plan or have an imagination, right? And so when we're looking at the word in Genesis, where we've got Yetzar, that is an inclination, okay? So that is basically following a desire. But the chashav is a plan or an idea that will be executed, okay? Now, the reason why this is important is because in the wilderness season, we have a Yetzer, okay? So going back to Genesis chapter 8, I see where this went. Okay, so going back into Genesis chapter 8, we're looking at this word Yetzar right here. See that form or framing or purpose? This is the idea of every purpose or imagination of his heart. And this is specifically Yetzar, and there's our word Ra, okay? Now, the reason why this is important is because there is a sentiment in Christianity. There's an understanding in Christianity that this verse indicates that we are born evil. It says it is evil continually from childhood. And specifically in the Hebrew, it is the sense of from when you're starting to grow up. Okay. Now, the reason why this is important is because if you look at this verse incorrectly, you will not realize what the Father is saying here. This is how I want you to think about it. The intensification of all power in the universe, okay, knows the sentiment of a man's heart from his inception. And yet he felt it necessary to bring the flood. Now, Enoch, all the way to Noah's father, all prophesied that the flood was going to come to pass, right? Enoch named his son, his death shall bring. And in principle, when Methuselah died, during the 7-day mourning period of Methuselah, Noah entered the ark. Okay. Now, I know that there is a belief, a feeling in us that we were born wicked. But I want you to think about this more along the lines of how Yahweh is being understanding with this. Let's go back into this verse. And the Lord was pleased with the aroma of the sacrifice, and said to himself, I will never again curse the ground because of the human race. Even though everything they think or imagine is bent towards evil from childhood, I will never again destroy all living things. Now, this is one of the things I want you to think about. Is he saying here that he's not going to destroy the earth because they're not going to do the right thing anyways? That's not the case. I want you to think a minute about the wilderness season, okay? Remember that the wilderness season is supposed to expose darkness through hunger and through a pulling back of protections and through a thirst. You get hangry during the wilderness season and you say things you shouldn't say. You do things you shouldn't do. You make very poor decisions to expose your darkness. But what caused that in the first place is you reaping. Remember, this is a season of reaping. The Omer, we're supposed to take account of the Omer. We're supposed to take account of from the first cuttings, or the bikurim, the first fruits. We're supposed to take an account of the cuttings every day. We're supposed to take inventory of the harvest that's being brought in. The reason for that is because why would Yahweh want to expose the darkness of a heart? What's wrong with the darkness of a heart? If he already knows about it and he already understands that that's in them, why would he want to expose it to the person? Well, there's two reasons. The first one has to do with the process of elevation. When you identify a bad attribute in yourself and you begin to desire to not have it anymore, the alternative is going to be a higher self, a higher purpose. Okay? Now, the reason why this is important is because there is actually a concept here that's hidden. And it is simply this. When we develop an imagination about something, and we begin to move in a direction, during the wilderness season, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is present. Why? Because we're hungry. We're thirsty. And we don't have protection. And that can turn into some really destructive stuff in us. But it's not designed to condemn you. He's not up there waiting for you to trip. You stupid kid. Seriously? You couldn't see that log? He's not doing that. What he's doing is he's waiting for you to fall backwards after you've tripped, to catch you and put you back up and say, watch out for that log. That's it. There's no grand failure here, okay? But there is a possibility of failure. And that's kind of the direction I want to go with this. Now, getting into this, getting back into this Proverbs verse, because this is on Sunday afternoon, I believe it was, he says, man can make his plans, but I direct his path. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's easy. You know, we get imaginations, we get vain imaginations. And as long as we're dependent on you show us the right path, and then we don't do that stupid stuff anymore. And he said, no, that's not what that means. Okay, because you know what? There's a sentiment in Christianity, there's an understanding in Christianity that we are literally working with the idea that thy will be done, right? Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Not my will, but your will be done. Please take this cup from me, right? There's an understanding there. There's a concept built into the believer that is true, that we have to be conformed to this will. And so it doesn't matter what your emotions feel. It doesn't matter what your thoughts are. It doesn't matter what your reality is. It's only what he wants and what he cares about. And as long as you're submissive in that, then you're a good kid And as long as you're submissive to that, then you're a good Christian. But I want to show you what he showed me. So we can make our plans, okay? We can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. Let's take a look here in the Hebrew. It's a very short verse. Look at this. It says it's the heart of Adam. In the Hebrew, this literally says, this is Lev. Lev is heart. Adam. Yachashav. Derecho. Yahweh. Kin. Sa'ado. Okay? That's it. That's all it is. So Lev. This is in the construct form, which means there's an of assumed. So this is heart of Adam. Heart of Adam. Heart of Adam, Yachashav. Heart of Adam, will. Here's the imperfect right there, but it's in the intensive, which means it's what? It's a imagination with an intent of execution. Okay? Yachashev, sorry. Yachashev. So, Lev Adam Yachashev. The heart of Adam will plan. Okay? The heart of Adam will plan. And then, Derecho, his path. Yahweh, Yachain. Let's look at this kun really quick here. Kun, to be firm or established. Okay? And then what? Sa'ad. Come on, pick it. Good grief. Go, go, go. There we go. To step or pace or stride. Sa'ad. So what does this literally say? Adam's heart will plan. And the path, and his path, whose path? Adam's path, Yahweh will establish. It doesn't say he directs his path. It doesn't say he directs anything. It says he establishes it. Okay, so let's talk a minute about this. In Christianity and in the sentiment of Christianity, we have had this process of believing that we are inherently evil and cannot trust ourselves, right? The flesh is always a problem. Our hungers are a problem. Our desires are a problem, right? Our emotions can't be trusted. Do you see the picture that's being painted here? That Yahweh made this really jacked up piece of junk and really honestly is just waiting for it to make a mistake. Now there are people that say, oh, but wait, before when Adam was in the garden, he was perfect. Oh, really? He was perfect. Because my Bible says he was lonely and Yahweh had to give him something to make him complete. So Adam was not established as perfect in this world of formation. He had hungers. He had desires. And when we want to get crazy with it, desire when it is conceived becomes sin, and sin when it's fully grown becomes death. He had the capability of sin. He was not perfect. But I propose to you when Yahweh said, you know what, I ain't going to do this to this world anymore. And the reason why is because, yeah, the prophets did call this down on this place. And I agree there was injustices and some stuff needed to happen. And I definitely provided a way for there to be a new human race through Noah, who was pure in all of his generations, which consequently goes back to, was he pure through merit? Or was he pure through the righteousness of the lamb that was slain from the foundations of the earth, Revelation 13:8. In other words, the righteousness that Noah had nothing to do with his obedience. Was he obedient? Yup. Enough so that he knew what the difference between clean and unclean was. But the reason why this is important is because when we get into this, we're about to get into this. there is a sentiment that all we do is evil. Do you want to live that way? Do you want to feel that way about yourself? Because I got to tell you, I serve a God who is my friend, and friends value what friends value, even if they themselves don't value it. In other words, he may not care about the color of a BMW, but I do. And he gave me a blue BMW. He may not care about what I desire in a friend, but he gave me a friend who matches me. Okay? He is very interested in the personal involvement in your life, but he don't want an automaton, and he definitely does not want a slave. He wants a friend. Remember what Yeshua told the disciples? No longer do I call you guys servants, but you are my friends. And in Luke 22:24, I believe it is, he says, you are the ones who went with me through my trials. What an amazing, can you guys grasp that? The intensification of all power in the universe stuffs himself into a human, goes through trials, and there are people who got his back. That is. All right. So let's look at this word chashav for a minute, okay? When we're looking at the word chashav, a couple things that we need to do. First one is it's used 124 times. So it means what it is translated as. It's not one of those anomalies. It definitely has to do with the brain. But looking at the Strong's definition, what do we see? To plate or interpenetrate, literally to weave, or generally to fabricate, figuratively to plot or contrive, usually in a malicious sense, hence from the mental effort to think, right, regard or value or compute. Let's go ahead and look at the Brown Driver Briggs, and let's look at the Aramaic. So the Aramaic is definitely, they're all parking it with that concept of being dubious, okay? But interestingly enough, it says to think or account, all right? Now, when we're looking at this word, I think it's important that we look at some of the context in which it's used. And Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord accounted it to him as righteousness of his faith. Just out of curiosity, let's go see what that equates to. Genesis 15:6. 15:6. And Abraham believed the Lord, and it was accounted to him for righteousness because of his faith. Let's go see where our word chashav is used. It was accounted. To think, plan, esteem, calculate, invent. To make a judgment, imagine, or count. So there's a lot of ways in which we could read that proverb, right? But the short version is what it's literally saying there is that you can have, listen to this now, you can have an imagination about something, and Yahweh is going to establish it. So let's talk about a minute about what would need to be in place in order for this to be functional and not dysfunctional. Remember, Yahweh said the desire or the inclination of man's heart is evil continually. That word evil there is the twisted head. Going back to our board, that is literally this concept right here, that evil is a distorted thought or a dysfunctional thought. So then if I'm correct in this, then I would assume that the necessity here is to understand what he was trying to explain. He says, I'm not going to destroy the earth anymore because they got this thing going on in their head from childhood. In the garden, Adam was in full fellowship with God. What do I mean by that? Literally, this man did not have mommy or daddy issues. He did not have deficits by which he was tempted by sin. However, there is something very important that you need to know. Paul tells us that a woman is supposed to remain silent because Eve was deceived, but Adam sinned. Paul also tells us in Romans that what? Sin entered the world through one man, not one woman. Who ate the fruit first? The woman. Who got in trouble for, or who brought sin into the world? Adam. What does that mean? Going back to James chapter 1, what does it say? You are led away by your own lusts. And lust, when it is conceived, becomes sin. What does that mean? Adam wanted to eat the fruit. Adam wanted to eat the fruit. At the core of Adam's existence was a desire to eat that fruit. And so when his wife ate it, he didn't rebuke her. He didn't condemn her. He didn't bring about the change in her that was necessary for her to have not been communicating with the serpent in the first place, but instead ate the fruit. Why? Because he wanted to. He desired it. And so when it says, and she gave also to her husband who was with her, he was present, waiting for her to eat the fruit so he could eat the fruit. Oh. Thank you, Adam. But the point that I'm trying to make is that there was an inclination towards rebellion of the commandment, don't eat the fruit. But other than that, he was in full fellowship with God. And what I mean by that is that he himself couldn't necessarily be tempted by the fruit. In other words, he would not have eaten the fruit had his wife not eaten it. That's a given, right? Furthermore, the serpent couldn't communicate with him, or he would have. Serpent communicated with Eve, and then Eve brought about the situation. Did Adam desire it? Sure. Does that play a role here? Possibly. Because if he desired it, then maybe that's what caused the serpent to do it in the first place. Because you know that there's an invitation for darkness when you start playing with it. Right? Okay. Why is this so important? Because Yahweh says they're evil from childhood. You know, there are a few infants, toddlers, and children in my life. And I'm not going to be a fundamentalist and try to establish when it's okay for the consequences of death as a result of sins unto death would be appropriately applied to the condemnation of a child. So everybody thinks that what this is saying is that we're born evil, but really what's going on here is what twists ahead. Think about what twists ahead. What causes a person to think incorrectly? What causes logical fallacies? The concept is simple. Nurture, not nature. It's the parents. It's the parents screwing their kids up because of their own issues. So you grow up and you have deficits. There's 6 childhood needs, right? What are they? Safety, connectivity, self-esteem, self-expression, autonomy, and realistic limitations. You put all those in a kid, you're going to raise a good kid. But if even one of those is missing, that becomes the deficit, and therefore the fear, and therefore the need, and now they don't react to the world correctly. See, this is about to all tie in, and you're going to go, oh. So let's talk about the person who has a deficit of self-esteem. They weren't given proper self-esteem by their parents. Now that becomes a need and therefore a fear that it won't happen. And so now they are going to react to that fear in some sort of way. So now when it comes time for there to be given self-esteem to that person, they're afraid of it. Okay? Because the psychology behind this is as the development occurs, the need is never met. And so the fear that the need will never be met begins to play. And then what? We begin to react to fear. Let me remind you about fear, okay? So here's how it works. Danger comes into your life. Danger comes into your moment. Fight or flight kicks in. Now you can throw a Volkswagen, right? Now you can box, or you can run a dead 2 miles without even skipping a beat, right? That's the point here. You get big, you get strong, you get fast. Danger is legit and causes those, right? You get some danger right in front of you, and now it's time to be in a state in which you can hear better, see better, move faster, and be effective. But an imagination about the future that may or may not come to pass, right? An imagination about the future literally turns into that same reaction without danger being present. That's fear. And so what do? We compensate for it. Fight or flight kicks in and we compensate. And so now we are what? We are reacting to an imagination about the future that might or might not be true before it ever happens. And guess what's going to happen? Your reactions, your emotional attachments to it are indication that that's the direction you want to go. And so your life, your world goes in that direction. You're afraid, and therefore that's what's going to happen. But you're going to make it happen, not only with your brain and your mind and your reactions, but you're going to treat people a certain way. So interestingly enough, the wilderness season exposes the fears. And that's key. If man would just begin to execute the plan, man can make his plans. Yahweh would back him. Now here's why. Basically, short version of this is simple. You can curl up in the bed, trembling, shaking, afraid, paralyzed. And here's the crazy part about it. The initiative required to execute a plan requires risk. And what's that risk? That you're going to fail. But here's the cool thing about it. If you fail, you're in the same boat you are if you just laid in bed and was afraid. So let's say that you want to start a business. Consequently, we just started Quantum Productions, right? I just, the other day, registered my LLC, Quantum Productions. Terrified of the situation? Yep. Not really sure how it's going to go. Don't even really know how to do the things that need to be done. But when I registered that business, I understood one thing, what he told me that night. Man can make his plans, the Lord directs his steps. And I was like, yep, you're right. I'll do what you tell me to do with it. And then he literally said, yeah, no, that's not what I mean. And I was like, oh, because then it started to become clear. I am going to establish you because you didn't lay in your bed afraid. But what triggers the fears? Past experience, right? So now there's this moment when you are actually going to have to do something different than what you've always done. You're going to have to jump in with both feet. And I'm going to tell you something. I always thought, for a long time, I thought that the wilderness season was the time when you really needed to chill and just sit back, go with the flow, reap what you've sown, let it happen, be done with it. But it is abundantly clear to me that if you don't take the initiative during this season, you will get stuck here until Yom Kippur when you repent for it. You will step into the 10 days of awe as a disheveled, unfaithful, half-asleep bride. Because why? When the trumpet is blown, she's woke up, but who has the oil? Right? Everybody falls asleep in that parable. But there's only one group that actually had enough oil. And so the point is what I'm trying to say is that you can go into Pentecost, you can go into your betrothal with him elevated, having turned away from the cloud and headed back to the back of the camp and start whooping some folks. Or you can be the stragglers who got attacked. And then I'm going to also propose to you, you can be the ones that say, God brought me out in that desert to die, which is an easy task. Let me tell you, it comes real easy. Oh, I wish I was dead. Done. Mission accomplished. Wilderness season, check. Okay? Or you can understand that man is coming. That man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. That's 8:3. I let you be hungry, so to expose your heart so that you would learn man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. There is deep revelation to be had during this season. Now, the reason why this is so important is because the wilderness season actually exposes the fears. This whole thing is about whether you trust him or not. But if you do trust him and you actually execute the plan, you actually move forward and I'm not afraid of the enemy and are not afraid of being hungry and are not afraid of being thirsty, he will establish your plan. Because I'm going to propose to you some pretty interesting things. Take, for example, why in the world do humans worship gods? Why is that? What's going on there? Let's take a look at let's take a look at our board really quick here. Okay. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go back to this one. Okay. What is in the tent? Provision, protection, and instruction. I want some green. Provision, protection, instruction. Right? Okay. So now somebody has provided, or somebody has given protection, or somebody has given instruction to a child. Okay. And as the father providing for and giving provision, protection, and instruction, those 6 childhood needs would be met. But there's a dereliction here, right? There's a dereliction. One of those needs, 2, maybe 3 of those needs were not met. And as a result of that, now you've got a screwed up kid. That screwed up kid grows up being afraid of those things that he didn't receive. Afraid that he's never going to receive them. Afraid that that's just not part of the option for life. So interestingly enough, a dereliction of these things creates the wound. In other words, when there's a failure here, evil is created. And what is evil? A twisted head. It's a dysfunctional thought process. It's a dysfunctional understanding of reality. What is that designed to do? Well, interestingly enough, I'm going to show you what it is designed to do. It is designed to, so if we put Ra up here at the top, which is evil, this is not shepherd, this is evil, okay? Which is what? Dysfunctional thought. Listen, you cannot find evil present just in existence of nature. You only find evil in the process of humanity. Okay? Dysfunctional thought was created by what? A deficit of provision, protection, and instruction. But now here's the interesting thing about it. Yahweh asks to be your father and give you provision, protection, and instruction. What is he doing? He's offering to fix those deficits, like he did with Adam, with Eve. Adam had a deficit. He was like, I got you, buddy. Here you go. Enjoy that. Just don't, never mind. Just don't listen to it. Don't eat the fruit. Okay? He didn't get it. Okay. So at any rate, now what's interesting is evil and dysfunctional thought is actually what? A lack of trust. We talk about, well, I tell you what. We talk about the concept of trust, okay? In terms of the ability to be vulnerable. So let's talk about this so that if we have number one is safety. Number two is connectivity. Number three is autonomy. Number four is esteem. Number five is expression. Number six is realistic limitations. This is the fence in the yard, right? This is the fence in the yard. And mom says, don't go outside, right? Don't go outside the yard because you're going to get hit by a car. Now, your disobedience of that realistic limitation is what? Right? You're going to get hit by the car. But if mom says, don't go outside because I'm afraid that you'll go outside the fence, that's not a realistic limitation. It's a violation of autonomy, and it's a violation of realistic limitations. Do you see? So it's really easy to mess this up because some of it is going to require trust in things like the kid itself. But do you see that the actual damage being done is creating evil? And it's intensifying it. Because this is all about provision, protection, and instruction. This is instruction, right? This is protection. See? And so the principle here is that the wilderness season is designed to expose those things in you, but there's a reason for that. What is going to be exposed are these things right here as a deficit, which means what? Number one, Abba wants you to see the things that are missing so that you acknowledge them and trust him to put them back in place. In other words, reparent you. He's waiting to give you that opportunity. The way that he's going to do that is by prospering you. Why? Because you're an adult now. You don't need a bottle anymore. You're an adult now. He wants you to trust him that he's going to fill those deficits. And the best way to do that is to jump off the cliff, which means what? Make a plan, execute it, he establishes it. But in order for you to be in a state where you can know what plan is correct, you have to have an understanding of realistic limitations, which is what? Torah. You see, that's the key here. The realistic limitations, that's Torah, right? Your expression, your autonomy, your esteem, all that stuff is all part of the plan. Connectivity could probably be a part of the plan. Do you need his protection? Absolutely. Will you get it? No doubt in my mind. The people of Israel were still protected. It's just Joshua had to do the work, not the Red Sea. They were still protected. In my mind, I have this concept that the wilderness season is designed as a limitation for you to overcome, and once you do, you will prosper. Because the moment that I began dropping my fears, crazy stuff happened this week. And believe you me, fears played a role in relationships this week. Fears came up and I was through with it. I was not okay with my connections. Once I just said, okay, what do I know? I know that when he taught me all this is when he asked me to be father, and he was bringing me through a healing of trauma. And I had to become vulnerable to him. And interestingly enough, he did that through human beings. Just like human beings are what created the evil in me in the first place, not me being born that way. So when he says it's evil from childhood continually, yeah, because the kid's not getting what he needs. And that's the beauty of this thing, is that our parents can never do this perfectly. Because why? Because they got baggage, right? And their parents had baggage. And we have baggage, and we do it to our kids. I could give you this list right now, and you start trying to apply every one of those things, and I guarantee you, your kid is still going to be like, that was a rough life. It's just that way, okay? But the premise is, and you look back to your childhood. If you had all those things applied, how would you be today? What was missing? Which one of these words makes you uncomfortable? Because I'll bet you that's the fears you need to work on that consequently are probably becoming outbursts during the wilderness season against your loved ones. I can almost guarantee it. So why do I bring up man can make his plans, but the Lord directs his path, right? Why is that process relevant here? Because I really do believe that you can hit this wilderness season on the ground running. I am wondering how next year is going to go after the revelation that I've gleaned this year as to how I'm going to count the Omer next year. Because I've done plenty in terms of going, okay, yeah, there's proof I'm still a little mad about things, but I've never gone from the point of view to say, you know what, Yahweh, I'll make myself vulnerable. You bring the answer. You bring the manna. You bring the water. And I'm going to propose something to you, and this is kind of crazy. The wilderness season is the reaping season. You're reaping what you sowed. Galatians, right? Galatians, where you will reap what you sow. You sow to the flesh, you will reap corruption. This is the season of corruption. Sorry. That's how this works. God will not be mocked. You will reap what you sow. Okay? But that's going to come with mercy, but also it's going to come with something else. If you will let that vulnerability exist, that you're hungry, that you're thirsty, that you don't feel protected, you don't feel safe. I'm going to tell you right now, the God I serve is faithful. He will absolutely be the answer. You let him be your Abba. Let him be the answer, because I'm telling you, this week has blown my mind. And when I said, okay, fine, I'm going to let you do it, what has happened has been phenomenal. And to just give you an idea of how that's going down, literally on Monday, I'm hitting the ground running. The computer's here. I heard it get dropped off. And so now, what are we doing? We are moving forward, and I'm scared to death because a long time ago, somebody told me I wouldn't amount to shit. A long time, somebody told me I could never do it. That's why I'm scared. I'm scared because every time that my father would get frustrated, that's what he would say. But he was just repeating what his father had told him. And thank God in heaven, I haven't been able to repeat it to my kids. And so from that point of view, I'm hitting the ground running because why? Because I'm going to make myself vulnerable. Because Proverbs says he'll establish me. We're going to do it, right? Now that isn't all a result of this thing and that thing being put together, okay? That's all just happening, like the timing. I finally ordered the computer. I'm ready to start the studio. I will be sending in a composition this week. I finally have the stuff that I need to be able to do the business. But I could very easily sit on this. I could, because there is definitely a fear of failure present. And so Yahweh says evil is in the child's head continually as an inclination. We will incline towards the path of least resistance. He asked to be Abba. He gave you the spirit of adoption, so let him be Abba. But that means you got to make yourself vulnerable, which means that you have to let him put people in your life to answer those deficits. I don't know if you gathered by now, but this is not some external thing occurring on your behalf without people being involved. If you haven't figured out, there are people in your life. You know how many people I talked to that said, man, if I didn't have people in my life, I'd blow my head off. Well, there you go, dude. That's the point, right? You have purpose. You have existence. This is not a comfortable existence. But if you will take the time to let him give you shalom during this season, this can be the springboard. I want you to remember that concept. Okay, let me show you something. Remember this? Remember this concept of death? This concept of here, let's do it this way. I like to do different colors so you guys remember stuff. This concept of death, this concept of life, this concept of maturity, and this concept of entropy. Do you remember that there's this idea that there's this birth in the springtime? There's this new life in the springtime. There's this new hope in the springtime, and yet we're going through the wilderness season in which there's no hope, no life, no peace. This is absolutely contrary right here. But from this season to this season is the counting of the Omer. You literally are experiencing the opposite of what you're supposed to experience during this season, because there's some sort of thing in us that won't trust. The wilderness season is an illusion. The manna was coming. We can look at that story, right? We can look at that story. Hindsight's 2020, right? We as not the Israelites in the wilderness at that time can look at that thing and go, oh yeah, they were so rebellious. I mean, dear God, look, they come out of Egypt, the Red Sea, the plagues. I mean, dude, right? And literally the next day after Midrash go, if I had a gun, put a bullet in my head. Saying the same words. Why? Because it's that season. So, the wilderness season is an illusion. You are literally looking at the dysfunction of life as a limitation that has power over you. And what have I taught you? You cannot be defeated. You can only be persuaded. You have dominion over this earth. Psalm chapter 8 says, everything except Yahweh is under us. Demons, angels, principalities, diseases, etc. all under us. Now, we are so far removed from who we were in the book of Acts, we have much to learn. And what the church has done to Torah and what the church has done to humans is just horrid. But there are those select few. There are those select few who have actually tapped into the reality of who he really is, and have tapped into the fact that he is Abba. I will challenge you that there are people who say praise to the Most High. They don't know Abba. Because if they did, they'd say Abba. There are those who say, you know what, we worship the God of creation. No, you don't. Because you would say Abba. And I propose to you the reason why I say Abba is because I know how he has fathered me. He's been the strength of the tent. He's been the provision, protection, and instruction. I have not been in want of those things when I ask him. You cannot be defeated. You can only be persuaded. So the wilderness season is an illusion. You are a god over the wilderness season. Just everything is under you. So looking back, hindsight's 2020. We go, oh yeah, they were so rebellious. I can't believe they go all the way to the promised land and they don't go in. Come on. Right? But that's because we see the manna and we see the water and we see Joshua win. But I want you to tap into those moments before that. I was on a hike one time, the Upper Palisade Rim, and I ran out of water at the top. I cannot tell you what kind of day that turned into. It was devastating because once I started to dehydrate, the lactic acid started building up and I started cramping. And then my knees stopped working because the muscles were cramping and they were getting fatigued. And by the time I got down the hill, it wasn't only about water anymore. It was about all kinds of stuff was going on with me. It was bad. That moment showed me their moment in which I was like, wow, I don't know if I could really get through this without cursing God. If I had to stay up there, it was a 3-hour hike down to the bottom after I ran out of water. I was sucking on buttons and doing all my survival techniques, and it was not doing anything for me. I needed water, and the nearest water was down at the bottom. Y'all, if that went on for a few days, I'm gonna have my moment. I am. You're not gonna like me. You're gonna be like, Rabbi, I didn't know you could say those words. You're not gonna like me. And my mom and stepdad will tell you how nasty I get when I'm hungry. I didn't see water on the other side of that hike. And what I mean by that is that when I ran out of water, there wasn't a thought in my mind that God would provide it. I just needed to get down the hill. But what if there was no getting down the hill? There you go. And so we can look at that story and go, oh yeah, that water, the water from the rock, Moses struck the rock. Boy, did they not know, right? Waters of Meribah. Well, man, if they would have known, right? The manna falls, right? Establishes the Sabbath, establishes the days of work, and establishes proof that he was going to provide for them. Provision, protection, and instruction. To be one of those stragglers, having the cloud way, way off in the distance. Remember, 1.2 million people. Way off in the distance. And all of a sudden, here comes these marauders behind me. And the cloud doesn't shift like it did before. I know what I'd be saying about him. I know what I'd be saying about God. And yet here comes Joshua to come rescue, Yeshua to come rescue, right? To come rescue. But I didn't know that. You see, that's what you're encountering here. You don't see the water coming. You don't see the manna coming, and you don't see this other thing coming. So what you need to do is you need to make a plan. You need to execute it. You need to stand by it. And one of the things that you need to do in order to make the correct kind of plan is make yourself vulnerable with Yahweh, which means you're going to make yourself vulnerable with people, which means there's going to be trust and there's potentially going to be betrayal. But right now there's going to be trust. And when you do that, then you can hit the ground running. And that's the key to this thing. Now, finding that scripture that says that man's imaginations, machashavet, which is that word chashav, are evil. I thought it was in Genesis, but I can tell you it ties these two together. Because you can have imaginations that are evil. You can contrive in your head how to control the wilderness season. You can say, oh yeah, you know what? I'm not gonna, I'm gonna steal some water, or I'm gonna steal manna. I'm gonna force the circumstances instead of letting him flow. Listen, what is the relief that came when the rock was struck. A stream in the desert. A way was prepared in the wilderness. He will establish you if you are willing to not try to control the wilderness season. And he will establish you if you are willing to allow the wilderness season to expose the darkness in you, but also to what? What's the other thing that is going to happen here? It is simply this. You are going to be elevated. You're going to have shalom like you've never had before. Because you're going to be convinced of your God. You're going to be convinced in your heart that he absolutely is going to provide it, protect it, and instruct it. And then you can jump on that branch because it's not going to break. And that's the kind of God I serve. And that's the kind of God that the Israelites served in the wilderness. So regardless of whether you end up cursing God and dying, he's not waiting for you to fall during the wilderness season, y'all. Come on, man. I want you to think about this. You're on a hike with your kid. He's hiking in front of you, and you are just waiting for him to trip over a branch so you can whack him upside the head. Is that realistic? If you're that kind of person, there's more than just that we need to deal with. He's not doing that. He is obviously waiting for you to fall. That's part of the wilderness season. He's waiting for you to say, that we would have stayed in Egypt where there were onions and leeks and garlic to eat. But the man is coming, right? So, amen. We've heard the message before. The man is coming, the water's coming, all that stuff. But there's another initiative here. And that is, number one, making yourself vulnerable to him during this season and letting him parent you and letting him give you what you need. Number two is to hit the ground running. I mean, I can't think of a better time to start something new. I can't think of a better time to take a risk. Because look, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to be in the same state you were. So this is the time. This is the time to take the risk. This is the time to not be afraid. The wilderness season is terrifying. I've taught you about the 3 attacks, right? What were those 3 attacks? We have the deal attack, we have the direct attack, and we have the circumstantial attack. What is the wilderness season? A bunch of bad circumstances, right? The enemy attacks us with these bad circumstances. There's this thing happens, the car breaks down, this bill happens. Next thing you know, we're in debt up to our ears doing this thing over here. And so there's this attack. What's that doing? Pulling you off of the battlefield, pulling you away from the battlefield, pulling you away from the cognition of the wilderness season. What's the second attack? It's a direct attack. One straight boom to the face. At that point, you know who it is. The circumstances, that doesn't seem that way. But that next hit, oh yeah, that he just declared his identity. That person is Satan. At that moment, that person is Satan. Just like it was with Yeshua when he said, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Now a person is actually your adversary, and it's a direct hit to the face. But that last attack is the subtle one, where he just whittles down more and more of you until you're exhausted, and you will say these words, "I need relief." And relief is offered with compromise. If you will bow to me, I will give you relief. I'll back off if you back off. Why is he offering that deal? Because you're a threat, and you're supposed to be on the front lines fighting for the stragglers during this season. You want to elevate during the wilderness season, rescue a soul from the fire. But in that process, don't neglect you jumping off the cliff and showing yourself to be faithful. This is definitely the time to take risks. Risk with money, risks with relationships, risk with friendships, with forgiveness, all kinds of things. This is the time, okay? So at any rate, to recap and make it simple, he understands. He understands that you got some screwed up stuff going on. He wants to show you it, so he creates a season for that. A season that is supposed to be new birth, but instead is death. So that you will not accept that reality and you will step into new birth. And as you count your Omer and move into Pentecost, which is what? The betrothal for the entire marriage covenant with God, the betrothal is Pentecost. And in that season, you have now presented yourself as this bride who has been vulnerable and exposed. But that elevation, those times where you have overcome this wilderness. So listen, Joshua overcame it. He did not murmur against God about the water, about the food, or that he had to go deal with the Amalekites. Joshua did not murmur. He elevated. And when he did, he prevailed over Amalek. He elevated. But he allowed himself to be elevated. Remember Moses' hands. He allowed himself to be elevated. And that's what you need to do. Allow yourself to be elevated. But if you will move through this wilderness season in that elevation, you're going to have an amazing experience. The rest of you, not so much. And believe you me, if you're going to follow the path of least resistance, if you're going to stay on the sidelines because of the attacks, and you are going to operate in a state of not doing anything because of the fear of the season, because I'm telling you, it will assert itself. This season is nasty. I am not trying to paint a picture that this is going to be a bowl of cherries. It's your reaction. It's your chashav, and it's the reversal of the dysfunction of your thinking. It's untwisting the rope. And what's amazing is the other meaning of that word, ra, is friend. So the spelling in one place is evil, and the spelling in another place is friend. Can you imagine? You're actually untwisting the rope and replacing it with the eye, and therefore now you have a friend instead of a twisted head. That's powerful. That's powerful. And that's what this season does. And I'm sorry you got to go through it. You've sown some stuff and you got to go through some junk. But I can tell you the way you respond, it's going to change everything. It's going to change everything. It's going to alter the energy of this season. Okay? Okay. So, I'm going to go ahead and end the YouTube.